Okay, Rabbi Isai, let's get started. We're on the Mishnah on Daf Chav Zayin, on Daf Chav Vav, Amid Aleph. The Mishnah states on the fourth line, the Mishnah states as follows: Nitma'u shireha, nisrafu shireha, avdu shireha, kimidas Rabbi Eliezer keshera, uchamidas Rabbi Yehoshua pisula. We all know that the process of offering a mincha involves putting flour in a kli shares, and then adding oil, and then doing something called kemitza, where you take a fistful of flour, and then you take that fistful and you put it in a smaller kli shares, you transport it to the mizbeach, and you pour it or deposit it from that kli onto the mizbeach. What happens to the remnant of flour, the majority of flour that's left in the larger vessel? That's called shirayim, and the kohanim eat that. Now, what happens if before you have a chance to put the komets on the mizbeach, the shirayim either becomes tameh, lost, or destroyed by fire, or any other way? So this is a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua in a more general machlokes, which is described in Maseches Psachim. Rabbi Eliezer says, no problem, just because there's nothing for the kohanim to eat does not disqualify the komets. But Rabbi Yehoshua says, and this is the language used by animal sacrifices, im ein dam ein basar, im ein basar ein dam. He says if you lose the blood, then the meat becomes disqualified, and if you lose the meat, the blood becomes disqualified. Similarly, if you lose the shirayim, which is meant to be eaten by the kohanim, then you can no longer use the komets and place it on the mizbeach, according to Rabbi Yehoshua. Plain and simple, okay? So the Gemara now says, Omar Rav, v'hu shenitma'u kol shireha, avol miksa shireha lo. So Rav makes a statement about Rabbi Yehoshua Shita, who says that if you lose the shirayim, so then the komets is no longer usable. So he says, but that's only if the totality of the shirayim become tameh. But if only a segment of the shirayim become tameh, and there's a remnant of shirayim which is still tahor, so even Rabbi Yehoshua would agree that it's okay, and you can bring the komets on the mizbeach. Now, kasalka daitach nitma'in avud b'sarif lo. So it's interesting that if you parse Rav's language, he says specifically it's only if a majority of the shirayim become tameh, and you have a remnant that's not tameh, then it's okay. So our thinking was, when we look at that language, is that Rav is only making this exception when the shirayim become tameh and you have a remnant that's not tameh. But if the majority of the shirayim get destroyed and you have only a small remnant left, then Rav would hold that it's not okay, according to Rabbi Yehoshua. So the question therefore is, what's the difference? My kasavar. I kasavar shiura milsihi afilo avid v'sarif nami. If he holds that as long as you have a remnant that's acceptable, so why then should there be a difference between the majority which became tameh or the majority became lost? So if you're going to tell me that having a remnant that's intact is not acceptable, so then why, when the majority becomes tameh and you have a remnant that's not tameh, is it acceptable? So you'd have to say demiratz tzitz. Perhaps you'll argue because we know that the forehead plate of the Kohen Gadol atones for all sundry matters of tumah that are introduced into the Beis HaMikdash. And perhaps this too would be a reason why that even if the majority becomes tameh, tumah is something that can be alleviated. And that's the reason why the komets is still good. Well, ihachi kol shireh hanami. Well, by that argument, if the tzitz is miratzah for tumah, then you shouldn't have to have a remnant at all. Then even if all of the shirayim became tameh, it should be okay. So we really don't understand Rav. So the Gemara answers, la'olam kesavar shiura milsihi, v'nitma v'hu adin la'avid v'sarif, v'haita kamer nitma reishayu nakat. So the Gemara says you didn't understand Rav. Rav was not limiting himself to only cases where the majority of the shirayim became tameh. Even if the majority of the shirayim is destroyed or lost, the same halacha would hold true, that as long as you have a small remnant of shirayim left, and we'll see ostensibly it's got to be a kazayas left of shirayim, then the komets is still kosher. Why? Because he holds that shirayim, as long as you have a remnant of shirayim, then it's acceptable. Why then did he only talk about tumah? Because that was the first example on the list. It's almost like he said, if the shiraim become tameh, etc. As right, or ... Then as long as you have a remnant, that's okay. Then it's fine. Now, Kidatanya, this idea that according to Rabbi Yehoshua, as long as you have a remnant that's intact, then the komets is still kosher, is like the brisa. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Kol hazvachim shebetorah shenishtar mehen kezayis basar o kezayis chelev, zorik es hadam. But kachatzi zayis basar, kachatzi zayis chelev, eno zorik es hadam. Now, we're just looking at the parallel statement of Rabbi Yehoshua when it comes to animal sacrifices. He says that if the whole carcass of the animal becomes lost after you do the Kabbalah Sadam, right? But all you have left is a kezayis, an olive size of chelev, that is going to be placed on the altar, then the blood is still kosher for sprinkling. Or, alternatively, if you only have a kezayis of basar that is meant to be consumed by the kohanim, then the blood is still kosher for zrika. You either have to have a kezayis that's usable for the mizbeach, or a kezayis that's usable for human consumption, and that will permit you to sprinkle the blood even though the rest of the animal is missing. However, if you only have a half a kezayis of chelev and a half a kezayis of basar, they are not conjoinable. And the reason is because one is meant for the altar and one is meant for human consumption, and those are apples and oranges. You can't connect the two. Now, uva'ola afilu kachatzi zayis basar v'kachatzi zayis chelev zorik es hadam mipnei shekula kalil. The next thing the Brisa says, but that's with a carbon that's meant to have its meat consumed. But let's say a carbanola, where all of the carcass is meant to be burnt on the altar, then even if you have a half a kezayis of chelev and a half a kezayis of basar, they are conjoinable because they're both directed towards the same place, which is the mizbeach. Uvemincha afilu kula kayemes lo yizrok. But when it comes to a mincha sacrifice, then even if it's fully intact, you should not sprinkle the blood. Now, the Gemara's, this is a bizarre statement. There's no zrika when it comes to a mincha. So what are we talking about? There's no sprinkling of blood when it comes to a mincha. What in the world is this saying? So mincha maya vidita, that's the Gemara's question. What are you talking about a mincha for if we're talking about animal sacrifices? Amar Rav Papa minchas nesachim. Salka daita chamina hol uvahadi zevach ka'asya kugufei dezivcha damya kamash malan. So Rav Papa says, what we're talking about is an animal sacrifice that has accompanying libations or flower offerings. Let's say a person's bringing a korban toda, okay? He did the Kabbalah, he's got the container of blood, and all of a sudden the entire carcass is destroyed or lost. But fortunately, he says, not all is lost, because at least I have the loaves of bread that accompany the toda, so maybe that's sufficient. So the Brisa says, no, it's got to be part of the animal's body has to still be usable. If you have an auxiliary part of the korban that is not from the animal's body, that's not enough to allow you to do zrika sadam. Now, minahani mili. So now the question, the Gemara says, where do we know this from? That, and this is referring specifically to the idea that even if there's no meat of the animal left, but there's still chelev, there's still fat that's destined for the altar, that's still enough to permit you to do zrika sadam. Where do we know this from? Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Yishmalu mataba mishum Rabbi Shua ben Chananya Omar Kra v'hiktir hachelev l'reach nichoach l'Hashem chelev v'afal pi she'ein basar. Because we have a pasuk which talks about the animal sacrifice, and it says he shall allow to smoke up, he shall smoke up the fat as a savory fragrance to Hashem. And that implies that if even all you have is the fat, then that's enough for it to be an acceptable korban to Hashem, and therefore the blood is still kosher, even if there's no flesh left, even if there's no meat at all. Now, va'ashkechan chelev, yoseres ushtei kloyos minolan. So now that's fine, because the pasuk addresses specifically chelev, which is the intestinal fat. But how do you know? There are other parts of the body that are meant for the mizbeach, the kidneys, the liver lobe. How do you know if, let's say, you have no meat, you have no chelev, but you have a kidney, right? You have one kidney, that's all you have left of the animal, right? How do you know that the dam is still kosher in that situation? The ketani uvemincha afilu kula kayemes lo yizrok. Mincha hu de lo yizrok hayoser shtei klayos yizrok minalan. And how do I know that even just the kidney is, if you have that left, that is kosher? Well, I know that from the language of the Brisa, Because the Brisa says that the only time it's not kosher is if you have something that's not from the animal's body, like the loaves of bread of a toda. But if you have, that implies that as long as you have any part of the animal's body that is destined either for human consumption or for the altar, then it is okay. So the question is, where does the Brisa know that from? How does the Brisa know that even not just fat, but also the liver lobe and the kidney, which is not mentioned in the pasuk, is also good enough to let you do zrikas adam? So Rabbi Yochanan didei omer l'reach nichoach, kol sha'atamal l'reach nichoach. So Rabbi Yochanan says, of his own, based on his own svara, based on his own logic, he says, look, what does the pasuk say? He shall bring the chelev on the mizbeach as a savory fragrance. That implies that any body part, any portion of the body that provides a savory fragrance to Hashem is acceptable and lets you still do the zrikas adam. So it doesn't specifically have to be chelev, it could be any part of the body. Now, but then the question becomes, well, then why did you have to write both chelev and reach nichoach? Just write one and I'll extrapolate the other. So the Gemara says, the ikas of chelev havamina chelev in yoseres ushtei kloyos lo kas of rachmana reach nichoach. Because of rachmana l'reach nichoach havamina filu mincha kas of rachmana chelev. So I'll tell you why. If the Torah would have just said v'hiktir hachelev and would have stopped there, so that I might have inferred from that only if you have chelev left of the body can you do the zrika. But if you have any other body part that's meant for the altar, such as the liver lobe or the kidneys, then you can't do zrika if that's all that's left. So therefore the Torah had to write reach nichoach, which tells you that anything that is pleasing to Hashem on the mizbeach allows you to do the zrika. And if the Torah would have only written v'hiktir l'reach nichoach and would have omitted the word chelev, I might have inferred from that anything that can be placed over or on the altar is acceptable to let you do zrikas adam, including the libations. But the chiddush is, that's why the Torah to write chelev, it has to be part of the animal's body. If it's not part of the animal's body, and it's only a libation that is poured onto the altar, but from a vegetable source, that's not enough to let you do zrikas adam. Okay, let's go on. Next Mishnah. Shalo bichli shares pasel v'Reb Shimon machshir. So the first statement of the Mishnah is, now we know the protocol. You take the original flour, the soles, you put it in a large vessel. The Kohen does kemitza, takes a fistful of flour, and then what happens? Come on, Chevra, tell me what happens next. What happens next? Wake up, let's go. Come on, what happens after he does the kemitza?
He puts it in a smaller vessel.
Thank you, Bill. He puts it in a smaller vessel. And what does he do then? He brings it to the Mizbeach and spills out the contents onto the fire on the Mizbeach. Is that clear? By the way, we're learning Maseches MENACHOS, right? We're on DAF Vav. If you don't have that information intact in your mind, so I'm not sure what you've been doing. But that, at least, you got to walk away from Maseches MENACHOS just knowing the perfunctory protocol, right? That you got to have at least intact, right? And there's other protocols also about mixing with oil and the different kinds of menachos, but the basics, you got to have. So you got to do kemitza from a larger vessel that's sanctified, and then you put it into a smaller kli shares, you transport it to the mizbeach, you spill out its contents, this komets, this fistful of flour, you spill it out onto the fire. Okay? אנחנו לא מדברים על הפרטים עכשיו, רק צריך לדעת מה שאמרתי. בסדר? Now, let's go on. What happens if instead of taking the komets and putting it in a kli, you instead hold it in your hand, walk over to the mizbeach, and just drop it onto the fire? Have you done your job? Is the mincha kosher or not? So this is the machlokas that's being discussed in our Mishnah. If you don't put it in a smaller kli shares and you just take it by hand and drop it on the mizbeach, so the Tanakama says it's pasul, and Rabbi Shimon says it's kasher.
Isn't it connected to Kabbalah Saddam, like in terms of if you were bringing a...
In many ways it is. Well, you'll see. You'll see. That's what we have to really open up. We're going to open up that discussion now. Now, hiktir kumtza pa'amayim kesheru. The next statement of the Mishnah, which we'll also analyze today, is that if a person were to take the fistful, this komets, and break it in half, right, and spill out one half first, and then a minute later he spills out the other half, b'di'evet it's still kosher. And we'll talk about that later. But let's analyze the first statement first. The Gemara now says, Amar Reb Yehuda Berei. By the way, there's going to be multiple opinions as to what our Mishnah means when it says that you didn't put the komets in a kli sharis. Let's see. Amar Reb Yehuda Berei de Reb Chia, my time of the Reb Shimon. What's Reb Shimon's reasoning for saying that it's kosher? Amar Kra Kodesh Kodoshim Hi Kachatas V'Cha'ashim. Because the Torah says that a mincha is holy of holies, akin to a korban chatas and a korban asham. Now, what's the purpose for the Torah to compare it to these two specific types of animal sacrifices? Bala ovda biyad ovda biyamin kachatas, bichli ovda bismol ka'asham. And explains Reb Yehuda Berei de Reb Chia as follows. The Torah essentially is giving you the option of doing the avoda of a mincha either by hand or by utensil. If you do it by hand, then it's akin to a korban chatas, where the zrikas hadam is done by hand. The Torah by the korban chatas says, he shall dip his finger, and by the way, the word finger always means the right finger of the right, the index finger of the right hand. He shall dip it in the container of blood and touch it to or sprinkle it to the mizbeach. So that's unique to the korban chatas, where instead of pouring out or splashing the blood from a utensil, you do the placement of blood you flick it with your finger. So what do we see? Since the blood work can be done with a finger, so too it can be done with a bare hand for the komets as well. The komets is akin to the blood. So the argument is, but just like the korban chatas is limited to the right hand, the komets can be done by hand as long as it's done by the right hand. Now, that explains why the Torah compares the mincha to a chatas. Why does the Torah compare a mincha to an asham? Because the blood of an asham is not sprinkled with the finger, but rather is splashed from the kli itself onto the sides of the altar. And in that situation, you have to use a kli. You can't use your hand. So therefore, you can use a kli for the mincha service as well. You can either use hand or you can use a kli. But by the asham, there's no specific requirement to dafka splash it with your right hand, holding the kli. You can even hold the kli in your left hand. Similarly, if you use a kli, you can pour out the komets from the kli sharis onto the mizbeach with your left hand if you so desire. Or if you do it, it's kosher. I'm not sure if it's saying that even lechatchila it's okay, but it's certainly kosher b'di'evet.
You can take the kli sharis, the small kli sharis, and dump it directly. Is that what
Yeah.
Or you can take it out of the kli sharis.
That's what Rabbi. 1 second. No. We're going to get to that discussion, what you just asked, later. But just take it more simply. You do the kemitza. Whether the kemitza is put in a kli shares or held by hand for the rest of the time, according to Reb Shimon, it's kosher. So according to Reb Shimon, even if you do the kemitza and you don't put it into any utensil, but you carry it by hand to the altar and deposit it, as long as you do it with your right hand, it's kosher, according to this. Okay. Now, the Rabbi Yanai Omar, Keven shekamso mikli shares ma'aleu maktiru afilu bahamyono, va'afilu b'mekeda shel cheres. Now, Rabbi Yanai is even more liberal, and he says that, listen, you did the kemitza from a vessel, from a sanctified vessel. Therefore, even if you don't use your hand to put it on the mizbeach, and you don't use a kli to put it on the mizbeach, let's say I take the komets and I put it in my sash. Kohen has a sash. So he puts it in his sash, walks over and dumps it from his sash onto the mizbeach. According to Rabbi Yanai, that too is acceptable. Why? Because he says, listen, it was the flour in toto was already sanctified in the larger container that you started with. And because that was a sanctified vessel, you don't need any further vessels, and you don't even need a hand. He disagrees with the first opinion of Reb Yehuda bar Rabbi Chia. Now we have a third opinion. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar hakol modim bekomet sheton kiddush. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is more machmir than the first two shittas. He says, even Reb Shimon, who says that you can use your hand, holds like Bob. Because what did Bob think that we were talking about? Bob thought that what we were talking about, according to Reb Shimon, was you do the kemitza, you take the fistful of flour and you put it in a vessel. And then, once you've put it in that small vessel, you can take it out and put it on the mizbeach. even Reb Shimon, who is liberal, says it must first be put into a smaller vessel. Once it's put in a smaller vessel, then you can take it out and put it by hand on the Mizbeach. But the Chachamim say, no, you have to pour it from the vessel onto the Mizbeach. And that's the machlokus. But according to Rav Nachman, if you didn't put the komets into a smaller vessel at all, and you just transported it by hand, even Reb Shimon would agree that that would not be kosher. Go ahead,
Put
Alan.
it on the Mizbeach. Where does the marcheshet come in?
The marcheshet?
Like,
Well,
what do you mean?
a marcheshet is a specific type of mincha. It's a specific type of deep dish that is used for one specific type of mincha. So that's where you're cooking it first. You're baking it or cooking it first. Then you have to put it into a klishares,
And
then you do the kemitza, and then you, right? So in other words,
I thought you fry it on the Mizbeach.
no.
So
There must be some other place where you prepare it, and then you break it up into pieces after it's baked, and then you do the
Kemitza's after
kemitza.
it's-
Here we're talking about a more standard mincha, which is of raw flour, but in those cases, which is mixed with oil. But in other cases where the Torah says to bake it first, that's all before it gets to the mizbeach.
before the kemitza.
Yeah, before the kemitza. Okay. All right. So, thank you for clarifying. Okay, now Meisvei. So we've got three opinions, okay? We've got three opinions as to what Reb Shimon Shita is. The first opinion of Reb Yehuda bar Rabbi Chia says, Reb Shimon says it's kosher as long as you hold the komets in your right hand. Rabbi Yanai says, no, Reb Shimon says it's kosher no matter how you have the komets, even if you never place it on the mizbeach with your hand, but rather you transport it with your sash or some earthenware unsanctified container, perfectly fine. And Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak is the most machmir, and he says, no, you must put it first in a small ministering vessel, and if not, then even Reb Shimon would hold that it's not kosher. Now, Meisvei. Hekter chalavim ve'evarim ve'etzim shehelan bein biyad bein b'chli bein b'yaminu bein b'smol kesherin. That when it comes to placing the fats and the innards and the wood that you place on the mizbeach, they can be placed either with a utensil or by hand onto the altar, and they could be, if you're going to use your hand, you could use either the right hand or the left hand. HaKometz v'haketoris v'halavona shehelan bein biyad bein b'chli bein b'yaminu bein b'smol kesherin. And furthermore, the komets, which is what we're talking about, and the incense that you place on the altar, in other words, the menachos that we're talking about now, and the frankincense as well, you could either place them on this beach with a hand or with a kli, and either with the right hand or with the left hand. So this is Tiyufta de Rabbi Yehuda Berei de Rabbi Chia. This is a refutation, is it not, of Rabbi Yehuda Berei de Rabbi Chia, who says that if you're going to use your hand, it must be what? The right hand. Must be the right hand, according to Rabbi Yehuda Bar Rabbi Chia. And here the Brisa says you could use your right hand or your left hand. So how do you respond to that? So Amar Lacha Rabbi Yehuda Bar Rabbi Chia litzdadin katani biyad biyamin b'chli bein biyamin bein b'smol. He says I have to put a little kinach into the Brisa. It's true that the Brisa says you could either use your right hand or the left hand, but that's only when you're transporting it with a kli. Then you could hold the kli in your right or your left. But if you're holding the komets in your hand directly without a kli, then the Brisa would agree that you can only use your right hand. Now that's ambiguous in the Brisa at best. He's really putting something into the Brisa that the Brisa doesn't say, but he says, I could read it in, and therefore it's not a refutation. Now, Tashma, let's look at another Brisa. Kamso shalo mikli shares v'kidsho shalo bichli shares. So there's a bit of a problem with the girsa here. Some say that the way you read it is Kamso mikli shares v'kidsho shalo bichli shares, that if you do the kemitza from a vessel, from the larger vessel, and then you put it into you don't put it into a small klishares, this komets, vehelo vihiktiro shelo b'klishares pasel. If you don't put it into a small klishares before placing it on the mizbeach, it's pasel. That would be like the Tanakama, right? But Rabbi Elazar, Reb Shimon machshirin b'matan kli. But Rabbi Elazar and Reb Shimon say that it's kosher as long as you took it from a kli originally, then even if you put it on by hand, it's perfectly okay. Now this is a kasha on whom? This is a kasha on Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman said that even Reb Shimon agrees that you have to at least temporarily put it in the komets in a kli shares. And here the Brisa implies that even if it's not put in a kli shares, it still will be kosher. So the Gemara answers, Ema mimatan kli va'elach. So what really, the way Rav Nachman will read this brisa is, you must put it in a small kli sharis after you do the kmitza, and then if you want to take it out afterwards and hold it by hand, that's fine. That's all the brisa means. But the brisa is still will still concede that it has to at least temporarily be put, the komets has to be put into a small kli sharis. Yes, Al?
Is the southpaw Kohen like a balloon?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. According to one Gemara, a lefty is a balmum and he can't do the avoda, right? But I don't remember where that is, where that discussion takes place. Maybe in Maseches Yom, and maybe we'll see it soon. I don't remember where it is.
But even I'm not a southpaw, but even a southpaw person can use the right hand, force it. Like I could use my left hand.
Correct. So there's a lot of discussion, but that's really not germane to today. Now, Tashma, let's look at the next brisa. V'chachamim omrim kometz ta'un kli sharis. So let's look at the next brisa. The brisa continues and it says, the chachamim say that you must always have a kli sharis when you have a kometz. Keitzad komso mikli sharis umakadshu bichli sharis umalo maktiru bichli sharis. So you have to do the kemitza from a kli sharis. You have to put the kometz into a kli sharis, and you have to place it on the mizbeach from that kli sharis. So it's very clear that Chachamim require a ministering vessel throughout. But Reb Shimon Omer, Kevin shekamsu mikli shares malu maktiru shelo bichlei shares v'dayo. And Reb Shimon says no. Since you did the kemitza from a ministering vessel, then that's all you need. You don't need additional vessels. As long as you then have the kometz in your hand, you can place it directly on the mizbech. Once again, a tiyufta on Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, who says that you have to put the kometz in a kli, even according to Reb Shimon. So the Gemara answers, Ema keven shekamso v'kidcho b'chli shares ma'alu maktiro v'dayo. So you have to knetch it a little bit. According to Rav Nachman, you'll have to read it like this, that as long as you put the kometz into a kli shares, then you don't need to do any more. You can take it out immediately afterwards, and then put it by hand onto the mizbech. That's what the brisa means. Now, Tashma, let's look at the next brisa. Komatz biyamino v'nosan bismolo yachzur liyamino. This brisa says that if a person did the kemitza with his right hand, and then he transferred the kometz to his left hand, so the halacha is, no problem, just put it back in your right hand. But bismolo, but if you did the kemitza with your left hand, so that's a malformed kemitza, therefore, v'chishe voleha ben chutz le'makomo ben chutz lizmano pasul ve'ein bo kares. Then if a person, while doing the kemitza, had a machshava pesula, like let's say he had a machshava of pigul, he had a pigul thought, this does not make him subject to kares. He may have disqualified the mincha by doing kemitza with his left hand, but it will not be subject to kares for pigul because it was a malformed kemitza, and when you do an avoda with your left hand, it's not subject to pigul for that very same reason. Now, some say that this is just a reiteration of what we're going to see, but some say you change the girsa to biyamino. So, but if you did kemitza with your right hand, chishev oleha chutz lemakomo pasul ve'ein bo kares chutz lizmano pigul ve'chayavan oleha kares. But if you do the kemitza with your right hand, meaning that it was a correctly done kemitza, then it will be subject to kares if you had a machshava of pigul. The only time it will not be subject to kares if you had a machshava of chutz l'makomo, which by definition does not get kares. That's according to Divrei Rabbi Lazar v'Reb Shimon. V'chachamim omrim keven shenasno lismol paslaso matnaso. So the chachamim argue and they say no. If you did kemitza in your right hand and you transferred it to your left hand, we don't allow you to put it back in your right hand. We tell you that no. This is, you've actually disqualified the kometz by putting it from your right hand into the left hand. Why? Because it's no different, my time, mishum deboy kedusha b'chli, v'keven shenasno lismol, nase kedam shenishbach mitzavar behema ala ritzpa v'asafo shepasul. Because the Gemara says, what's the law if I shecht an animal and instead of doing Kabbalah into a kli, I let the blood run to the floor? In that situation, there's no remedy for that blood. You can't scoop it up from the floor and put it in a kli. That blood is pasul. Similarly, if I do kemitza with my hand and I put it in my left hand, it's as if it's akin to letting the blood from a behema run to the floor. It's irredeemable now, and I can't put it back in my right hand to put it back to put it in a kli shares. since you need to put the komets into a kli shares, by putting it in your left hand first, you've ruined the komets. Okay? Now, what does that imply? If Rabbi Elazar and Reb Shimon permit you to switch it back from your left hand to your right hand, it sounds like michlal, that what? Michlal de Rabbi Elazar, Reb Shimon lo bo matan kli. Tiyufta de Rav Nachman, tiyufta. So this seems to be a refutation of Rav Nachman, because according to Rabbi Elazar and Reb Shimon, you don't need a kli. That's why if you put it in your left hand, no problem, just put it back in your right hand, because you don't need a kli shares. So that really totally refutes Rav Nachman's shita. You see very clearly from this brisa that according to Reb Shimon, if there's no kli shares at all after the kemitza, it's still kosher. Now, the Rabbi Yehuda Berei de Rabbi Chia misayeh alei, and it's also a support for Rabbi Yehuda Berei de Rabbi Chia, because remember, what did he say? He said you could use your hand according to Reb Shimon, but it's got to be your right hand, just like the korban chatas, right? And that's supported by this brisa as well, because the brisa doesn't say if you put it in your left hand, it's okay. No, if you put it in your left hand, you got to put it back in your right hand, because the avod is only kosher with your right hand. Good. Now, the Rebbe Yanai lemeti havi tiyufta. But is this a refutation to Rebbe Yanai? Because maybe, you see, according to Rebbe Yanai, not only could you use your right hand or your left hand, you don't have to use a hand at all. Why then does the brisa say that if you put it in your left hand, you got to put it back in your right hand? According to Rebbe Yanai, it shouldn't make a difference, because you could even put it in your sash or into a non-kosher vessel. So the Gemara says, Amar lecha Rebbe Yanai, ana damri ketana dehekter, v'lav litzdadim ketani. So Rebbe Yanai will tell you, no, remember we had that brisa before? Maybe this brisa is problematic according to me, but I have another brisa that I go like that explains Reb Shimon differently. Remember that brisa on the previous page where we had to kinech it in order for it to work according to Rabbi Yehuda Berei Chia? So I'll learn it without kineching it. That brisa had said that according to Reb Shimon, it's kosher whether you do the avoda with your right hand or your left hand for the komets. And so that's how I hold. It's true that according to this brisa's explanation of Reb Shimon, it's problematic according to me. But I subscribe to the other brisa, and therefore I'm not blown out of the water by this brisa. Okay, let's go weiter. Now let's look at the next part of the Mishnah, which was Hiktir Komtza Pa'amayim Kishera. The Mishnah had said that if you break the komets in half and you put it in two stages on the Mizbeach, it's still kosher. Now, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Pa'amayim v'lo Pa'amei Pa'amayim, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Pa'amayim v'afilu Pa'amei Pa'amayim. Now we have a machlokas between Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says the Mishnah only permits you to divide the komets in half, but you can't divide it in more than two parts. It can only be divided in a maximum of two parts. But if you divide it into 3 parts or 4 parts, etc., it's not going to work according to anybody. And Rabbi Yochanan says no. Just like if it's divided into 2 parts, it's kosher. You could break it up into 3 parts, 4 parts, 5 parts, ad infinitum, and it's still kosher as long as you put the whole komets ultimately on the mizbeach. So my beinayhu. So what taka is the difference? What's the machlokes? Amar Reb Zera yesh komets pachos mishnei zeisim v'yesh haktar pchusa mikazayis ika beinayhu. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi savar ein komets pachos mishnei zeisim v'ein haktar pchusa mikazayis. Rabbi Yochanan savar yesh komets pachos mishnei zeisim v'yesh haktara pchusa mikazayis. So the Gemara explains very interestingly. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is of the opinion that a standard komets is a fistful of flour of the average Kohen's hand, which always invariably is a minimum of 2 kezesim. And he also holds that the minimum for a komets to be kosher is a kezayis, right? Because that's the majority of shiurim in the Torah are a kezayis. So therefore, why does the Mishnah say that you can break it in half and put it in 2 stages? Because since each stage will have a minimum of a kezayis, because a komets is a minimum of 2 kezesim, so therefore it's kosher. And that's the reason why he says you can break it up into 2, but you can't break it up into smaller parts, because then each smaller part will have less than a kezayis, and it won't be okay. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, he says no, a fistful of flour is not always 2 kezesim. Many times it's going to be less than 2 kezesim, depending upon the hand size of the kohen. And therefore, if the Mishnah advocates that it's okay to break it up into half, those 2 halves could potentially have less than a kezayis. So obviously, the Mishnah holds that you don't need a full kezayis when you place the komets on the mizbeach. And if you don't need a full kazayas, then it doesn't matter whether you break up a kometz into 2 parts or you break it up into 3 or 4 parts. It doesn't make a difference. Once it's less than a kazayas, it's kosher. It's less than a kazayas, and it's kosher. Let's go weiter.
In practice, were kids that were 13 or whatever able to do
Well, you had to be at least at the age of 20 in order to do the avoda.
so you were full size.
But you could have had a guy
Yeah.
who's,
Yeah, smoker.
There you go. Soon to be an HBO miniseries, right? Itmar, kometz, me'emasai matir shirayim ba'achila. So now the Gemara says, at what point, this is an interesting question, at what point of the processing of the kometz can the Kohen eat the shirayim, eat the leftover flour? Because we know that once you do the offering of the kometz on the Mizbeach, the Kohanim are now permitted to eat the shirayim, correct?
Yeah.
That you got to have as well.
You mean the flour, and like to take it away and bake it?
The remaining flour that remains after you do the kmitza,
Right.
the Kohanim, that's called shirayim.
Right, and they can take
And the
that.
Kohanim take
Right.
that and they use it for personal consumption.
Right.
At what point does the shirayim become permissible for consumption to the Kohanim? Now, the question really is, you've placed the kometz on the Mizbeach. Can we then start taking bites out of the shirayim at that moment, the second I dropped it on the Mizbeach? Or do I have to wait for the fire to burn it a certain amount? So that's really the subject of a debate.
It is raw flour anyway, the shirayim is raw flour.
The shirayim, no, we're not talking about how you process the shirayim. We're saying at what point of processing does the kometz have to go through for the shirayim to be permitted for consumption to the Kohanim?
But he's saying it's raw flour, you can't eat raw flour.
I'm using an example. I'm just using an example. In other words, yeah, okay, if they wanted to take a bite out of it, they could. It wouldn't taste very good. If they wanted to start cooking it, they could. If they wanted to start, okay.
Why we everyone say
So, Meima Saimatu Shirayim Ba'achila. Rabbi Chanina Omer Misha Mashla Boetza or Rabbi Yochanan Omer Misha Tatzis Boetza or Beruba. So the machlokus is between Rabbi Chanin and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chanina says that the fire just has to ignite, just has to catch onto the kometz, and that's sufficient. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, the fire has to be burning the majority of the kometz. In other words, it has to be fully ignited, not just partially ignited, it has to be fully ignited in order for the shirayim now to be permissible. So Amar le Rav Yehuda le Rabba bar Rav Yitzchak asper alach taima de Rav Yochanan. Amar kra v'hinei ala kitor haaretz ki kitor hakivshan in kivshan mala kitor at shetatzis ha'or beruba. He says, you want to know Rav Yochanan's reason why the kometz has to be majority ignited in order for it to be permitted? Because the Torah uses the verb haktara when it talks about the offering of the kometz. Where else do we find the term haktara? By the destruction of the city of Sodom. And it says by the destruction of the city of Sodom, Allah kitor haaretz ki kitor hakivshan, that the smoke went up like smoke coming out of an oven. Now, at what point does smoke from a burning city start to be visible and ascend up to the sky? When the majority of the city has been incinerated or has caught fire. That's when you see those black plumes of smoke. You don't see black plumes of smoke until the majority of the structure is burning.
Is that true, like with the World Trade Center?
I have no idea. I have no
No, but
idea.
the World Trade Center, there was already plumes of smoke before.
All right. But maybe that portion of it was fully ignited. That's the point. So, Amr le Rabin barav Adel Rava, Amri Talmidecha Amr of Amram. So, just as a matter of protocol, Rabin said to Rava that your students say that exact statement in the name of Rav Amram. Now, let's take a look at a brisa. Tanya. Ainli ela dvarim shedarkan likarev balayla kagone varim upedarim shemalun umaktirin mibo hashemesh umisachlen v'hochlen kol alayla kula. Dvarim shedarkan likarev biyom. So the brisa starts off by saying, we know that there's a law in the Torah that if you offer a korban in the afternoon, then the body parts continue burning throughout the night. And we know that many times, if you do the, let's say, the tamid shel bein ha'arbayim, the korban tamid, that is offered in the afternoon, the late afternoon many times, you don't even have a chance to put the body parts on the Mizbeach until after Shkia, until after sunset. So they're allowed to continue burning throughout the night. Now, what about things that are exclusively only brought during the day and must be placed on the Mizbeach during the day? how do you know that there too the law states that whatever remnants are still burning should continue burning through the night? Kagon, hakometz v'halavona v'haketores u'minchas kohanim u'minchas kohen mashuach u'minchas nesachim shemalon u'maktiran mibo hashemesh. How do you know by all of these flour and incense offerings that you can place them on the Mizbeach even after sunset? So the Gemara says, wait a minute, what kind of question is the Brisa? The Gemara now interjects and says, V'ha amart darchen likarev b'yom. You just told me that you can only place these on the Mizbeach during daytime. So what kind of question are you asking that you can place them on the Mizbeach after sunset? That's contradictory. So the Gemara says, rather, the way you read the Brisa as Ela imbo hashemesh shemisach molchen kol halayla minayin. Rather, what the Brisa means to say is, what if you put it on right before sunset? How do you know that since you have the flour still intact and it hasn't fully incinerated, how do you know that you allow it to burn throughout the night? That's the question. And therefore the Brisa answers, Talmud loimar zos Torah sa'ola riba. Because the Torah says this shall be the law of the Ola. That's a statement that is an inclusionary statement, which means to tell you that not only for animal sacrifices, but for all sacrifices that have remnants that are still on the Mizbeach, when nightfall arrives, they continue burning through the night. Okay, so v'ha imbo hashemesh lo mishkachas la shetatzis or berubo. The question that the Gemara asks is, according to you, Rabbi Yochanan, that you require the komets to be fully ignited in order for it to be the shirayim permitted to the kohanim, that implies that the komets is not considered to be brought or sacrificed or brought to Hashem until it's fully ignited. But if it's not fully ignited because you put it on like 30 seconds before Shkia, then how is it kosher? If it can only be brought during the day and it must be fully ignited according to what you just said, then how do we allow you to put it on right before sunset? Shouldn't we require you to put it on the Mizbeach to allow, let's say, a few moments, like a couple of minutes for it to fully ignite before sunset? Shouldn't that be the law? So the Gemara says no. Lo kasha kan liklot kan lahatir. So the Gemara says, no, there are two different laws. There's one law about placing the komets on the Mizbeach. Once you place the komets on the Mizbeach during daytime, if Shkia comes 5 seconds later and it still hasn't fully ignited, that's a kosher hakrava. That's a kosher bringing of the korban to Hashem. There's a separate halacha, which is at what point can the kohanim eat the shirayim? And that has a different time of permissibility. That's when it is fully ignited. So therefore, you fulfilled your obligation of placing it on the Mizbeach as long as it was put on the Mizbeach before Shkia, even if it didn't fully ignite until after Shkia. But as far as when the Kohanim can eat the Shirayim, they have to wait until it's fully ignited. Two different laws. Now, Rabbi Lazar masnin la mibo hashemesh umokin la bepokein, v'chein ki asa Rav Dimi amar Rabbi Yanai bepokein. So these Amoraim have a different way of learning the Brisa. Remember, the Brisa's language was problematic because it said, how do you know that if you have a mincha that is supposed to be brought during the day, that if you put it on at night, it's kosher? But you just got through saying that it has to be put on during the day, so how could it be kosher if you put it on at night? So that's what made us modify the reading of the Brisa. But Rabbi Lazar says, you don't have to modify the reading of the Brisa. What it means is that if I put the komets on during the day, and then it exploded. Remember, like we talked about these exploding pieces of meat that fly off the Mizbeach, and you put them back on the Mizbeach? So that's what the Brisa is talking about. What if you have a komets that explodes and flies off the Mizbeach? How do you know that you put it on? You put it back on as long as it's still nighttime. That's what the Brisa is talking about. So the Gemara now says, you mean to tell me that Rabbi Lazar holds this way and Rabbi Yanai holds this way? Umi Omer Rabbi Yanai hachi. How could Rabbi Yanai say that? For ha'omer Rabbi Yanai ketorah shepakam el gabi hamizbeach afilu kartin sheba ein machzirin osan. That Rabbi Yanai was quoted as saying that if the ketores, which is the incense, is placed on the mizbeach and a huge clump of it flies off, you don't put it back on. As long as it was put on kosher, you don't return any exploding particles that come off, that fly off. You don't put it back. So he's contradicting himself. Atani Rav Chanina bar Minyumi b'devei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov asher tochal ha'ishes ha'ola al mizbeach ikulei ola atamachzer v'atamachzer ikulei ketores. And it's based on a pasuk. The pasuk says only the exploded pieces of an ola that are sacrificial are put back on the mizbech, but ketores is not a korban, and therefore if it explodes, if a huge chunk explodes and flies off, you don't put it back on. So the Gemara says, Sami mikan ketores. You're right. we have to say that the word ketores should be deleted from the brisa. We're only talking about karbanos, animal karbanos, and flour karbanos. But ketores, which is incense, is not part of this discussion. We agree. Now, Amar Rabbi Asi, ki pashit Rabbi Elazar b'menachos boy hachi. Now, Rav Asi says that when Rabbi Elazar was reviewing the laws of menachos and going through the halachos, he had the following question. Komet shesidro v'sidr alav es ha'ma'aracha mahu derech haktorah bekach or in derech haktorah bekach teiku. This is a separate question. The question is like this. We know that normally the protocol is that when you have a kometz, you put it on top of the fire and then it burns, right? What would happen if you changed the order? You took the kometz, and there's no firewood on that part of the mizbeach, and then you put the kometz on the floor of the mizbeach, the stone part of the mizbeach, and then you brought firewood and put it on top and ignited it all, so that the kometz eventually burned. Would that be kosher or not? Do you require the kometz to be on top of the firewood, or can it be underneath the fire? So the Gemara says, take it, we're not really sure. But now we're going to expand that question into a more generic question. Boi chizkiya, Eivorin shesidron v'sidr aleina samaracha mahu. Al ha'etzem amar rachmana davka al ha'etzem. Al dilma keben dechsiv kra achrina asher tochal ha'isha sa'ol al mizbeach iboy hachi avid take. Same question, but now with animal sacrifices. The limbs that are supposed to be placed on the mizbeach. What if instead of placing them on top of the fire, you place them first on the floor of the mizbeach and place the firewood on top of them? Will that be kosher or not? On the one hand, the Torah says that it has to be al ha'esh. It has to be on, or al ha'etzim asher leish, has to be on top of the wood. But on the other hand, there's another pasuk that says asher tochal ha'esh sa'ola, that as long as the fire consumes the ola, it's kosher. So here too, there's too much ambiguity, and the Gemara says take. And finally, our last question is going to be like this: Boy Rebbe Yitzchak Nafcha, Eivorin shesidron b'tzidei ha'ma'aracha mahu. What will be the halacha if you take those limbs and instead of putting them on top or on bottom, you put them adjacent to the fire? So we're going to see a discussion later on in Menachos whether adjacent is considered to be on top of or not. It's all prepositional, right? Is next to, akin to, on top of. So the Gemara says, Aliba demanda amar al mamish lo tiboy lach da al ha'etzim ksiv. So if you learn that it has to be mamish on top of the fire, so then it's not on top of the fire. There is such an opinion that if it says on, that does not include next to, and therefore it's not going to be okay. But the question really is, according to the opinion that says that sometimes on top of could also mean adjacent to or next to. So, next to horizontally. So what would be the halacha according to that opinion? Hachanami al besamach, o dilma al ha'etzim dumida al hamizbeach, mahasam al mamish, af hachanami al mamish. So the Torah says that you have to place the korban on the mizbeach. On means on top of, above, vertically above. So maybe that's what it means over here also, even according to that opinion, when the Torah says al, it must be on top of the firewood and not next to. And the Gemara says we're not really sure, and therefore here too we're going to leave off with a take. Have a wonderful day.
That's the origin of the song, On Top of Oak Smoky.
Yeah, very good. Rabbi Chanan ben Akash Omer Ratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Zakos Es Yisrael Leficha Chir B'Lem Torah Mitzvah Shneimar Adonai Chafetz L'man Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yad.
Amen.